Hi guys, welcome to my TED Talk. Haha. Okay, so I want to talk to you about informative writing. It's your last genre. Um, and informative writing is anything that informs. So you're going to see in this handout that I have linked for you in your email as well. It gives you some specific tips, but also a lot of ideas of what you could write for your informative. The big challenge with writing an informative piece is that all of the research you do is informative in nature. So it can be hard to take research from other sources and make it seem unique to you and your writing and your paper without just kind of feeling like, I'm just going to put the same thing they did because it sounds good already. So the biggest challenge really is avoiding plagiarism and coming up with something new. So this handout has some tips, and I'm just going to go over them and show you some examples and then talk about citations in this video. A good tip is to use multiple sources to find information for this section of your paper. Make sure not to rely too heavily on just one, because then you'll get into the trap of trying to make it look exactly like that one. You want to cite your sources in informative, and you want to cite your sources in argumentative as well. So if you didn't do that in your argumentative draft, you'll want to go back in and add any citations for evidence you got from somewhere else. You don't need to cite evidence in your narrative. When you simply cannot say it better than what they said, you can use direct quotations. You just don't want to rely on them too heavily. A really good tip is to switch the type of writing. A lot of times you're going to be looking at articles or bulleted lists. Don't write in that genre because it's going to look the same. Try something completely new, and I'll show you a bunch of different examples in a minute. Change the audience. Most of what you're reading is directed towards like a student adult audience, but write to a more specific group like kids or people who know nothing about the topic or the elderly. If you have a very niche audience in mind, you can write towards that particular group, and I'll show you an example of what that might look like. You want to in-text cite your sources for most of informative writing, like I said, but for some genres that doesn't necessarily make sense within the conventions of that genre. So if you're writing a newspaper or magazine article, you're generally, instead of putting in-text parentheses, you're going to do according to the New York Times, comma, in your sentence. And if you look at news articles, you'll see that all the time. They just start their sentence with their citation in the sentence. And then things like obituaries or autopsies or police report, you're not going to find parenthetical citations in those. So at the end of, if you use one of those types, at the end, write like a footnote or a parenthesis in-text citation at the end of it to tell us what sources you got the information from. The Purdue OWL APA page has a great set of APA materials, like the APA sample paper. And you see on this, your references page is going to have all of the sources you consulted in alphabetical order. And when you would go about citing any of these, like if you look at the sample paper, an in-text citation, you can find one. Where did it go? It'll have the author, comma, and the year, like this. Generally, you won't have 2 years, but they're citing 2 different sources from the same author. So generally, it'll look like author last name, comma, year. And if you don't have an author's last name, you would start your citation with whatever is the first part of that site. So in this one, in parentheses, it would be American Association of University Professors, comma, N period, D period, since this one didn't have a date. And this one would be American Association of University Professors, comma, 2018. And so it kind of just depends on what your citation is here as to what you would do in text. Okay. This site is linked and it has lots of really great information for you. So now, after we look at citation, we have all these potential genres, and this is not a complete list, but basically any type of writing you do that informs will work. And you could, if you introduced like a character in the narrative, maybe your character is given a brochure by somebody. Maybe your character is working to solve a murder, so they might actually be a person who would write a police report. Maybe your character is a journalist, and so it would make a lot of sense for them to write a magazine article about your topic. So your informative can kind of be based off your narrative, if that works. If not, it can be a totally separate piece. But a process analysis is like a how-to paper. This could include pictures as well as descriptions of steps, how to do contouring in your makeup, how to change your oil. Those are some examples of what a process analysis might be used for. That might make sense with your topic. A police report, an advertisement, a brochure, or a pamphlet. You might want to create your brochure, or if you do a type that you're going to use some type of like template, brochures or advertisements like jump out to me. You might end up wanting to create those in like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Publisher or any of the programs that you use and save them as a PDF or a JPEG, and then we'll get them inserted into your paper. If you have specific questions on that, depending on what program you use, I can offer you some help on how to get it where it needs to be. But a brochure or a pamphlet, you could, if you have a front and a back to that, that could count as 2 pages of your 10 pages. You could write a biography, a news article. You could do a PSA. If you wanted to do something more of a video and not actually have it be writing, you can email me and we can talk about exactly how many pages that would count as. If you're going to do like a minute and 30-second PSA, I would say that that was worth at least a couple pages of the 10-page minimum. Website, research paper, a list or recipe, an interview where you have like, kind of like a drama almost, where an interview you ask a question and then you write down what the person's response was. You'd obviously be fictionalizing their response, but you'd be giving information in that response. A medical journal, a scientific study, an autopsy report, an obituary, a table, chart, graph, a magazine article, a radio or news broadcast. You could write the transcript or you could record it. And an encyclopedia entry. Those are just some of the ways. A lot of times students will Google example websites or example medical journals, and then they can kind of use that as a template for what they would include. Example autopsies. If you are writing news articles, make sure to remember the 5 W's, N, and H. So answer all of the important questions first. The beginning of news articles start with the facts, and then they kind of funnel down to the more not as important details. And information is generally a genre that you want to write kind of shorter pieces for. So if you've covered all the information about a particular topic, don't keep going. Stop that piece. And if you still need pages, you can write multiple informative pieces. Or I put on your notes of like what to do for this week. You could write poems. You could include pictures. There's lots of other genres besides the 3 main genres that I required for this paper that you could do. And you can always email me or Zoom conference with me to discuss extra ideas like that. Lastly, I have some examples from students, and we're not going to like read the whole example, but I wanted to show you what these could look like, and I'm going to attach these on Echo. So this kid researched space, and then they changed the audience to writing about how to impress your parents. So when they write their facts, they give you a fact, but then they talk about how you would use it to impress your parents. They're talking about the dinner table and like how your parents look at you, etc. And so they're adding in a lot of their own voice besides saying, here's the fact, every planet in our solar system could fit inside Jupiter. Instead of just writing that, they're giving you a whole lot of extras with that information because they're writing for a particular audience, people that want to impress their parents. And they use kind of the list feature, which is really common in informative. So think about doing things like that to kind of organize your informative. this person wrote a news article, and so they used the same conventions. They have a title, they have a byline, they have a publishing date, and they made up like this doctor's name. I think it's from The Big Bang Theory, but this factual information is legitimately factual. They included a picture like you would see in a newspaper article. And for this one, he did decide just to parenthetically cite his evidence because he felt like that was easier. So you could do that instead of saying according to if you wanted. This is a kind of like a process analysis, but it's more of a how it works sort of piece. There's actually a website called How Stuff Works that gives you a lot of examples of what this would look like, but it's basically breaking down the scientific process and showing us exactly how it works. And then you see in this one, they include some graphs that make sense with the information. You could make your own graphs. You could include graphs that you find. Like I think this might have been one that they made themselves. But other ways, I mean, when you read like textbooks, you have lots of pictures and graphs that kind of help you. And then we have, this is a how-to paper. And so they've listed it as numbered steps. And so you could do that for a topic fairly easily just by listing out the steps for a specific audience. As you work on this, let me know how I can help. And if you want to kick around any ideas with me, I would love to do that. And if you get to the end of your informative and you're at like 9 pages and you're like, ugh, what's next? I have some handouts on poetry that give specific types of poetry. I have ideas. So if you are stuck and you don't know what to do, please contact me for some more help. I hope you guys have a great week.